This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. If you enjoy The Future of Everything, please remember to follow it in whatever app you're listening to right now. That'll ensure that you never miss the future of anything. Today, Jason Yeatman from Stanford University will tell us about how kids learn how to read. It takes vision, it takes an understanding of language, and the combination of many other factors. It's the future of reading. Before we get started, a reminder to follow The Future of Everything in whatever app you're listening to so you can always be alerted to new episodes and you never miss the future of anything. Learning how to read is something that many of us did when we were 4, 5, 6 years old. It's a critical thing that they do early in school. And we know that there's a range of skills that kids come in with reading. Some kids can read at 3 and come to kindergarten ready to rumble. Other kids, it's a bigger struggle. There's a disease called dyslexia or a disorder. It just refers to the kids who are at the lower end of reading efficiency. These can be treated. If we can recognize dyslexia, then there are well-known programs. In fact, we'll find out later that this is almost a solved problem once you've made the diagnosis. But making the diagnosis is not that easy. Well, Jason Yeatman is a professor of pediatrics, education, and psychology at Stanford University, and he's an expert at the neuroscience of how we learn to read. He's created, and he'll tell us about an app that can relatively quickly diagnose whether there's a issue in visual processing, awareness of language, or a combination of other factors that can then precisely diagnose the issue and allow teachers and others to intervene to make sure we get kids and even adults up to the level of reading that they should be. Jason, first question is, why have you devoted your life to understanding how reading is acquired and how it works?
Oh, that's the easy question. It's the most interesting thing the brain does, and it's also really important to society. So I actually started my PhD. I was deeply interested in how children's experience sculpts brain development. And I found reading actually as this interesting way to understand that, right? It's this made up kind of arbitrary invention of modern cultures. We've decided that kids must be successful in learning this skill in order to be successful in society. Um, and we spend a lot of time teaching kids how to do this. So as a neuroscientist, I can study how this process of learning to read actually sculpts new brain circuits that do incredible things. As a cognitive neuroscientist, the fact that learning to read is connecting vision, hearing, language in a new way is fascinating. And then, of course, once you start studying reading, you can't help but realize that this is critical to success in modern society. So it's a place where scientific insights can really inform advances in society.
Great. Well, thank you. And so you mentioned something about it's this weird thing that we've invented for which with great cultural importance. And I did want to ask about like a very foundational question is, are our brains wired to read? Uh, and that's a problematic thing for me to imagine because we went many years without reading. So tell me about our understanding of why reading and why the visual looking at symbols and then translate it into words. Why does that even exist? And like, what do we know about the core neuroscientific principles behind reading?
Yeah. So as
Super
you
easy
said,
question. Super
yeah,
easy question.
lots of questions embedded in the question. Well, as you said, our species was around for a long time before literacy was. Our
Yeah.
species was communicating through spoken language for a long time before literacy was around, right? So the prevailing theory is that there's nothing in our DNA that like created circuits that are waiting to see books. Right? This is an invention of modern society. Why was it invented? I don't know. But I think a lot of the theories are actually around like commerce, that writing
Yep.
down debts and so on was like the first beginning of writing things down. But that's more of a anthropological question than a neuroscience question. But the first forms of written language were Sumerian cuneiform tablets, I think, around 2500 BC. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
language that
Not
are
that long ago.
not that long ago, right? And the idea of a literate society, like a society where children are all taught to read and math, is really a brief blip in the existence of the human species. So this means that learning to read depends on the brain's capacity for plasticity, right? It's this interplay between circuits that evolve for other things. So evolved for spoken language, evolved for vision, right?
Right.
We are visual creatures, and we have a lot of our brain is devoted to processing visual information. And then there's this new cultural invention of literacy that involves tuning these circuits up to do a new thing, basically accomplish a new function through new interactions between these circuits.
Really, really interesting. And I presume, I guess, since we're talking about basics here, many things in humanity are kind of bell curves, right? Height, whatever. Do we see that in reading? And I don't even know how you would measure this, but you do. That's why you're here. That's why we're talking. Is there some sense in which reading skill or reading efficiency is distributed throughout the population, like many other traits, like height and weight and things like that?
Yeah, yeah, right on. I don't even need to say anything. You got it all there. Yeah, so reading abilities lie along a continuum. You have people that are exceptional readers. You have a lot of people that are around average, and you have you have some people that really struggle. When we say dyslexia or developmental dyslexia, people often think that there's something unique and like some discontinuity, and that's generally not true. It refers to the lower end of this continuum of children that persistently struggle with the process of learning to read. And there's great intervention programs and ways to support children who are struggling. But yeah, dyslexia refers to, as you said, the bottom end of this continuum.
Great. So I wanted to go to dyslexia because I know you've put a lot of time in, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about some of the interventions. But let's define dyslexia, because you've said some intriguing things there. You said that it's not that there's a yes no, but there's more like so is dyslexia not really a disorder so much as a description that that the reading is not going as well as it would if you were in the normal part of the curve, in the middle of the curve?
Yeah, but almost all developmental disorders are like that, right? And there's very few, unless it's like a neurological insult, like a stroke, right? So there's
Right.
disorders that are caused by, having a stroke where one day you were functioning one way, you sustained some kind of injury to your brain, and then after that, so there is there's acquired forms of dyslexia where adults, who are fully literate, have a stroke and then profoundly lose their ability to read, right? So that's a case where, there is this concrete disorder. But you think about anything that we characterize as a developmental disorder. Some people like the term disorder, some don't. But things that are typically characterized as developmental disorders almost always lie along a continuum. And my perspective is that it's really a policy question of where we want to draw the line. And you can think about this in a number of different ways. So yes, you have a continuum of reading abilities, and some children really have profound struggles and they need additional support, right? What's the level on this continuum where we want to say, like, oh, this is typical, this is disordered? That is partially a question of what sort of resources are we going to allocate to those that we put on one side of this continuum. So that's kind of a public policy or public health question. And others, like, what level of literacy skills do we need to get to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, like a functioning member of society, to be able to be employable? And so, these are actually questions that, where should we draw this cut point? I think is much more of a like public policy, public health type question. What do we want our society to look like, and what type of resources do we want to allocate to getting it there? Than it is a basic scientific question. And I can tell you about the factors that contribute to reading challenge. I can tell you about how we measure them.
That's where I want to go next. So please, because even me, not an expert, knows that it must have something to do with my understanding of my language, whatever my language or languages are, and it must have to do with my visual system. And then I got nothing. So tell me how should we think about reading and the kind of the skills that the kids or the new readers have to come to the task with, and where they have to be developmentally on all of these different scales.
Yeah, I'll give you the conventional view, then I'll give you the place where my lab has contributed specifically. So, the conventional view is that, as you started with, is that written language is a form of language, just like spoken language, and disorders of written language are really a language disorder. That and there's a lot of evidence for this, that children who struggle learning to read first struggle with something called phonological awareness, which is
Phonological. Okay, good. What is that?
yeah, phonological awareness. Thanks for slowing me down there, right? So being able to take speech and decompose it into its fundamental elements, phonemes. So take the word cat and Russ, what are the three sounds that make up cat? Can you hear the first sound? What's the first sound there?
Ka.
There you go. And then what's the sound after that?
Ah.
And then where do we end?
Ta. Ta.
Okay, now I'm going to give you
You could see I was
three.
a pre-med.
There you go. Yeah, three visual.
Eager to please.
I'm going to give you three visual symbols to represent those sounds, right? So what I'm trying to get you to realize that, like, if that idea of breaking down speech into its phonemes just fundamentally didn't make. If you said to me, Jason, what are you talking about? Like, then the idea of saying, well, now I'm going to represent those phonemes with visual symbols, just like wouldn't fundamentally make sense, right?
Yes.
So kids that struggle with this aspect of spoken language, it's really hard to learn to read. And that is kind of the most widely accepted causal factor in reading challenges and dyslexia. And I would build on that and say, that is one factor. And like almost all developmental disorders, scientists start off saying, well, what is the cause?
Right.
Why do kids struggle? Thinking that we're going to unlock, the one reason. And there are a lot of scientists that would say that what I just told you, that is the one reason. That's it. That tells you the story. And you look at the data and this, explains, I don't know, half the variance, maybe a little less. So if you are profoundly struggling with phonological awareness, you can be pretty confident that reading is going to be a challenge. But you also have a lot of kids who have challenges reading that don't.
Gotcha.
And so this is where the second thing you brought up comes into play. And an area that my lab's done a lot of research is looking at how individual differences in the visual system. When I say the visual system, I don't mean the eye per se. I mean your visual cortex, like parts of your brain that encode visual information. That individual differences in how your brain encodes visual information can also confer risk for reading challenges. If you have less precision in visual representations or like sluggish processing of visual information, that these are factors that we can measure and we have found contribute additional risk for challenges with reading.
So this is really fascinating. And for both of those two things, the phonological awareness, my new favorite phrase, rolls right off the tongue, as well as the visual system, do we understand, I'm not even sure this is an important question, but it might be interesting. Do we understand how much of that is nature and how much of that is nurture? How much of it is genetic and how much of it is your environment and what you're exposed to as a little kid?
It's a great question. I mean, so this is, now we're going to get into some measurement and screening stuff, right? So for almost every aspect of language, it's really hard to distinguish those factors because I mean, it's always both. I mean, that's the simple answer. Is like basically any is it nature, is it nurture debate. The answer is it's both, right? But the question is how much, right? How much is of phonological awareness is a intrinsic trait of the child versus like the language environment and the schooling environment they're brought into, like the educational opportunities that society affords them.
Yes.
So the answer is both. But one of the challenges there when we think about assessment and screening is trying to develop equitable measures that really are measuring something that's going to be a persistent challenge as opposed to just measuring the lack of opportunity that our educational system has given to a child.
Right.
And that is more and more where I think non-language based measures, such as measures of visual processing, can really be useful. Those are ones that we have more evidence are less affected by experience.
Right, that kind of makes sense. Whereas your environment, your exposure to language and your exposure to words and people talking, that's going to be very much a function of the situation you find yourself in with your family and your home. But everybody, unless you've been profoundly, yeah,
phonological awareness, like is one. So it's written into every dyslexia screening legislation, and many parents know this is a foundational skill of reading. So
right.
My youngest daughter is 5, and just kind of getting to that point where she's learning to read. And we're already starting to play all kinds of games around phonological awareness and dissecting speech into its phoneme. So like when she enters kindergarten, how much of her strength or weakness in that skill is going to be about her, or about the fact that like this is our bedtime routine. So we play phoneme games. And But when we think about like the speed and fidelity that your visual system can encode information, we tend to think, at least at a young age, actually, there's evidence suggesting like video game playing and other things actually like improve functions like visual spatial attention.
Huh.
Uh, so yeah, I don't know. Almost everything about the brain is influenced by experience. But when we think about screening for young kids, I think there's a lot of promise of adding visual measures on top of language-based measures.
Great. So I want to get to ROAR. You know very well what I mean. So tell me about ROAR and where it comes from.
Yeah, so ROAR, Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, had been a big transition in my lab's research. This started as a pandemic project. So my lab studies the neurobiology of reading, how basically the factors that shape individual differences in learning, how learning shapes brain development. And then came March of 2020. So every study we ever run always starts off with someone in my lab sitting in a room, a small room, usually one-on-one with a kid, administering assessments, often screening for dyslexia or using diagnostic assessments to assess whether the child qualifies, for example, for a study of kids with dyslexia. And as we all remember in that era, suddenly we couldn't do that anymore. So my lab has a long tradition of developing open source software. A lot of that like kind of interplay between engineering and science has played out in widely used packages for processing brain imaging data. So now we're all at home and we started asking the question like, well, can we develop other ways to assess reading skills that don't require this one-on-one interactive approach? And so we started leveraging ideas from the cognitive science literature about tasks that tap into the core factors of reading. We developed like a first web application that was kind of a fun gamified version of a task called a lexical decision task. Very simple task. I flash text on the screen and your job just to say whether it's a real word or not. So, you can do that with a swipe on an iPad. Could do it on a phone, but we disable phones for a variety of reasons. Just to keep
Swipe right if it's not a word.
Exactly. That actually, there you go. So then we ran a first study where we had all these kids that came through the lab, and we asked, we had this new hypothesis, right? This is just a scientific hypothesis about a new way to assess reading skills. We have all this assessment data because our lab had just shut down. We sent this web app home to all the families, just a link URL. And then we linked these two types of data, the individual assessment data and the scores from this new web app. And it's not often in my scientific career that hypotheses have such a clear answer. So the correlation between the two was 0.94. Right. So
wow.
You look at a scatter plot, and this is one of those few ones where there's just a bunch of points along a line. Exactly. So that was the first version of our single word reading measure. And from there, we went.
This is a technical question, but is that over all levels of kind of skill or efficiency, or is it mostly on the kids who were struggling, or all of the above, or none of the above?
That's a great technical question. Yeah, and so that was one of the other. You're getting to like figure 7 of the paper here. So that was one of the other things we looked at, is asking, is this just about detecting kids who are struggling, or and basically along the whole reading continuum, it was equally precise.
So you're getting me my whole bell curve that I asked you about in the first question.
Exactly, yeah, that we could. And so the first version of ROAR single word recognition was a long, basically a long task, but it was automated. So we could just send the link home to a bunch of people. They could take it. We'd get the scores back. And we went through kind of an iterative research and design process where we tried to make it more interactive and gamified so that we could bring it down to younger kids. And we ran another study and found that even in kindergartners, which is a really challenging age, by the way, to think about like building an interactive web app, right? Because these kids are just learning their way through technology. So one, make sure it wasn't just sensitive to how much time had you spent on an iPad, but actually,
exactly, yeah.
So that was the kind of next series of studies, and then we started building better computer adaptive testing algorithms that would like run client side in the browser. So basically, this is all like running on on your computer or on a Chromebook in a classroom, and got to the point where from our original study to where ROAR single word reading is now, it's about 10 times faster, where we can in 3 to 4 minutes through this computer adaptive testing approach really zoom in on a kid's single word reading ability, whether they are a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, kind of at this early stage of learning to read, or if they're a high school student. And you might or might not be surprised to know that actually there are a lot of high school students around the United States that are struggling across all their classes because they never mastered the foundations of reading. So
Wow.
yeah, that's where ROAR has gone now. So we have this suite of measures that span the continuum from kindergarten up through 12th grade that look at different aspects of reading skills. So we have, a decoding measure, a single word reading measure. We have a measure of sentence reading efficiency. So this other thing kind of alluded to, like how quickly and efficiently can you read for understanding. We have a measure, as you might guess, of phonological awareness.
Of
There's a
course.
whole suite of different measures that kind of all weave together through computer adaptive testing approaches.
This is Russ Altman. You're listening to The Future of Everything, and we're going to have more with Jason Yeatman next. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, and we're talking to Jason Yeatman from Stanford University about learning to read. In the first segment, Jason told us about how reading goes across a bell curve in the population, and that the people who are at the slower end of the bell curve with respect to acquiring reading can be helped and can be assessed with his new tool called ROAR. In this segment, he'll tell us how he's pushing ROAR out into the world to help schools, kids, parents understand if there are problems that need to be addressed. And he'll talk about a new partnership he's creating, not through a company, but through an academic partnership where the readers, parents, schools can be participants in deciding what questions to ask and how to answer them in collaboration with Jason's lab. In this segment, I wanted to ask, ROAR sounds extremely exciting. This is the tool that your lab has built. It has many dimensions and it can measure many things. How actionable is this information? You mentioned two really important groups, really young kids who are just learning how to read, around kindergarten. You also mentioned teenagers who might not have ever been diagnosed previously. Can we do things to help these folks, and what can we do?
Russ, let me ask you a question. Are you a glass is half full or half empty kind of person? Because I'll give you a
Half
different
full.
answer.
Half full for
You're half
sure.
full. Okay. Okay. Well, then this is, I think, I would say reading interventions are kind of a solved problem scientifically. Right.
Boom.
So, yeah. So we know what to do. Like we, like the broader we of like there are many exceptional evidence-based, highly effective intervention programs for students with dyslexia of all ages. Be that young students. So right, the ideal scenario is that you're screening kids when they're young.
Right.
That right at the beginning of kindergarten, kids that need extra support are getting a little additional support. Some of those kids, that's all they need is a little additional support. Others need a more targeted intervention. So ideally, what you want early in elementary school is an effective multi-tiered system of support, where kids are kind of progressively getting more support as data shows they need it. And that's like one place where we work with ROAR is trying to help schools build an effective multi-tiered system of support. This goes all the way up through middle school and high school. And I mentioned a lot of middle school and high school students are still struggling. And that's the one where, you can be half full or half empty on that point as well, where on one level, it's quite sad that many students are having struggles across all their classes, right? Think about middle school and like math is word problems.
Right.
A lot of information is gained from text, right? Students are expected to be able to go home and read a book and analyze, produce, reason about it. So if you still are struggling to decode words, everything is a challenge. And you can say it's quite sad that, a large portion of upper school students are still struggling with something that's actionable. Or you can say, well, this is great. We could create an educational system that provides the resources schools need and really gives every learner what they need. So I stick on the optimistic side, but I'll let our listeners choose where they want to go.
Exactly. So just one little refinement there. Question follow up is, when you were talking about ROAR, you mentioned several tasks. I think one of them was single word recognition, but then you had other ones, phonological awareness. So that implies to me that you're going to be able to make a somewhat precise diagnosis so that it's not that every kid will get exactly the same prescription, but that based on the results of the screening and the diagnosis, you'll know where to put the emphasis. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the exact idea, right? So data-informed decision-making can be used in a number of different ways, right? One is just this idea of a multi-tiered system of support, seeing which students just need more directed instruction. About 50% or so of kids, they're given a decent reading curriculum, like really kind of just make their way through it and don't have challenges. there's a, we're on a continuum here, right?
Right.
So there's a lot that like do need a little extra support, more guidance, more systematic and directed instruction. And then there's some that like really have profound struggles and need a more targeted, this often when we say intervention program, because more than just, a little more exposure to a general education curriculum, but more kind of targeted support in developing skills.
Great. And so, going back to ROAR, rapid online assessment of reading, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game. My words, not yours. A game changer, because now we can do this at home. It's easy. I'm going to guess it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier for the family. It's easier for the kid. It's probably less stressful. I'm not paid by you, and I don't even know if this is true. But when you're now thinking about pushing it out to the world, does this happen in a company? Or does this happen with you as an academic working at Stanford? And how does one decide the best way to impact the world with this kind of tool?
That is our continual question. I'll give you my answer. I don't know if I'm right, but here's my answer. So we've decided to scale ROAR through a research practice partnership model. We decided to keep this as an organization within Stanford. We currently work with hundreds of schools around the country. I think we're now have been implemented in 31 states. Maybe I think it's actually 32 today. We just added on another state.
Congratulations.
You can look online and see our map of which states have schools that have adopted ROAR. So we work through a research practice partnership model with schools all around the country. And what this means is that teachers, superintendents, administrators, families, communities, students are all a part of shaping the core research questions and guiding the direction of the technology. So it's not just us in the lab saying, well, here's the pressing challenge that we're going to solve, and then now we're going to bring this to society. Instead, right. the development of the research brings in the voices of the community. And when I say
the partners with a capital P, and they really are partners.
They really are partners, yeah. And to me, it's really important that we hear the voices from around the country, right? And this is for research, and this profoundly shapes our research now, where the conclusions we're drawing about reading development, when I'm telling you specific things that the visual system does that are important for reading, this is not just an inference based on a couple hundred kids in Palo Alto who came into my lab. This is based on data from, at this point, 30 states, hopefully soon 50 states. So our team would like to envision a new model for the role of academia and society. A model where research really is a conversation where we are aligning our academic questions. The core research questions we're addressing are aligned to real world challenges that a teacher, a family can speak to, and we're hearing their voices. And at the same time, also this is creating a pipeline where we hope to see deeper systemic connections between research and practice. Where it isn't a 10, 20, or never-ending year-long cycle to get new innovations into schools, but that this is done in real time through these conversations.
But this does mean, so that sounds great, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but this means that the communication channels from your laboratory to your participant colleagues, mm-hmm. you need to tell them what's up. You need to tell them what questions we're asking this week or this month or this year. You have to negotiate with them if their favorite question is not the one that is the one that you're decided to work on this month or this year. So I'm guessing that you have to build up a huge communications infrastructure. And how do you do that?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, that's, it's team science, right? So the composition of my lab has changed a lot over the years where we've been moving into this model, right? This type of work can't be done by, a professor, a grad student, and a postdoc, right? So we have
all of whom have exactly the same training.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, there's a lot of grad students who are actually think kind of exciting for the grad students, right? So you have grad students that are running randomized controlled trials, running experiments with N of 10,000 participants.
Yeah. Wow.
Which, when you think about, for a grad student, we're often like, the years of grad school are building up to like recruiting the 50 kids that are going to come in for your study. And they take that, they take the responsibility there very seriously. They see the opportunity, but also the expectation to like do things kind of at a different level. And we have an engineering team. So I think right now we have 7 full-time engineers that are all work here at Stanford and are part of developing ROAR, because we have to maintain the highest level of data security standards. We're integrated with the major student identification systems that are used around the U.S. So for a school, this often comes from school. The school wants to partner with us on a new research question, and one question is like, well, do we have funding to actually tackle that? I have to have like a postdoc that can lead the research, postdoc or grad student to lead the research agenda. But often when there's alignment, there's this exciting place where we can, Russ, if you said that your school district is excited about our current research goals and wanted to deploy ROAR to the 20,000 students, I don't actually know where you live, but that are in your district, I'd say, yeah, we can do that on Monday.
Wow. Okay, so in the last minute, ROAR is clearly a work in progress because I looked at I looked at your CV before, and there were papers about ROAR 4 years ago, and then you started adding little letters. It was ROAR, then it was ROAR dash this and ROAR dash that. What is the future of the needs for assessment, which will then feed into these kinds of experiments that you just described?
Yeah, I mean, it's extensive because there's many contributing factors that go into success, right? So we started off really thinking about dyslexia, which is a challenge in kind of the foundations reading, accurate and efficient decoding of words, right? So that was our first suite of measures. We're focused on this, but of course, reading and academic success is so much more, right? There's comprehension, there's vocabulary. So we've expanded to kind of thinking about to get nerdy for a second.
Yeah.
The multidimensional space of reading development and the variety of factors that contribute at different points along the learning trajectory. And then, thinking about how these kind of combine together to set kids up for success or challenges and, what can be done. So there's, many questions. Some of them are basic academic questions about, does this aspect of your visual system contribute to reading development, or does learning to read actually influence this aspect of your visual system?
Right.
And then there's others that are more, directly practical questions, like, what's the interplay between the speed with which you read and like the depth of comprehension, right? So one level, they're all measurement questions. They come down to having high quality measures that can look at this, but then it's once again an interplay between the academic research questions, the postdoc, the professor, the student that wants to drive research along with the school partners.
I just got to say, I have a 6-year-old grandson who's doing two things. This is from grandpa's point of view. There's two things happening. He's learning how to read and he's learning how to hit a baseball. And I can't help but wonder, are those things correlated? Like is success but the point is, what I'm hearing you say is that you're looking at a much bigger now set of potential inputs into the eventual kind of performance of the reader. And that'll be done in partnership with all of these new partners that you have across the country. One other quick question. We're over time, but is the issues of reading that you see in English, do we see that across all languages, or is there differences in different languages? And I'm sorry to lay this on you so late, but
you got the big question right at the end. Yeah. So I'll try to give you the quick answer. But
Please.
Actually, funny enough, right after this, I'm going to teach, and that's the topic of class today.
All right, awesome.
So the quick answer is, yeah. I mean, reading disabilities are across all languages. There's some languages that are more prevalent. The one that's most prevalent is English. Why is that? Because it's incredibly complicated. We have a very complicated orthography where there's not a one-to-one mapping between letters and sounds. So that increases the probability that kids are going to struggle. But they're everywhere. The contributing mechanisms are broadly similar across languages. And one of the current big research questions that actually been shaped by our partnerships is how to think about this for multilingual learners, right? How to think about the interplay between language development, reading development, development of the visual system for kids coming with incredibly diverse linguistic backgrounds.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to Jason Yeatman. That was the future of reading. Before we conclude today, I'm excited to share that we're trying a new Q&A feature on the show. If you want to send us a question about one of the guests, something that came up, a question that you think others might have too, you can send it to thefutureofeverything, all one word, at stanford.edu. Today's question comes to us from a listener, Sam Lewis in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it's for Professor Renee Zhao, one of our recent guests. Let's take a listen.
Hello, Professor. My name is Sam Lewis, and I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I love the show. I'm a big fan, but I was intrigued by Dr. Renee Zhao, the guest that you had on, with these very micro robotics. I think that's an amazing idea. Just think about the hospital time that we could save, patient time. But I have a question though. The robots, how smart is the AI? In other words, do they guide themselves? Say you want to go after a blood clot or a tumor, for example. And so you have to program them to attack that particular enemy, in a manner of speaking, that microbiotic. So can you do that on the outside? Do you control it, with sensors? I would think if it's AI, you program it the correct way and off it goes. I'd love to hear about it though, but I appreciate it very much, Professor. Thanks.
Sam, thanks again for listening, and thanks for submitting a voice memo question. We had a chance to check in with Professor Zhao, and here's what she said. When it comes to controlling the mag spinner robot, AI will work alongside fluoroscopy or X-ray imaging, which helps identify the clot location and enables AI to program the robot's trajectory and its interaction with clots. Fluoroscopy will essentially be the vision for the robot and for the AI to help make this all possible. I hope that helps answer your question, Sam, and thanks very much for sending it in. To everyone else, please don't hesitate to send us a question if you have curiosity, if we didn't quite make something clear, or if you just wondered a few extra things about the topic. Go ahead and send it to the future of everything, all one word, at stanford.edu. We'd love to know what's on your mind, what's really tickling your interest, and we're curious what conversations you want to have. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Don't forget, we have zillions of old episodes in our back catalogs, and you can spend hours and hours listening to them and learning about a wide variety of topics. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to share with your friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances, anybody who you like. Tell them, because personal recommendations are a great way to spread news about the show and help us grow. You can connect with me on many social media platforms. I'm at RB Altman, or sometimes at Russ B. Altman, on LinkedIn, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. You can follow Stanford Engineering at Stanford School of Engineering or at Stanford ENG.